Hey guys, tonight we begin with something heavier. Not a royal feast, not a knight's tale, but the quiet, brutal world of a man with an axe. You've probably heard of executioners, the hooded figures, the swinging blades, the silence that follows. But have you ever imagined living as one? Not just for a moment, not just in a story, but waking up every morning to the smell of old blood, the whispers of strangers, and the weight of justice, that no one really wants to look in the eye. This is not history for heroes. It's not glorious. It's not even particularly memorable. But it's real. And here, on History for Sleeping, that's the kind of boring history for sleep we explore. The kind that lingers. The kind that drifts with you into the night. So, before we start, if you find comfort in quiet stories like these, feel free to like the video. And maybe subscribe if you'd like more sleepy historian journeys like this in the future. Also, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always oddly comforting to know who else is out there, slowly drifting off beside us. Now, dim the lights. Maybe pull the blanket up just a little higher. And let's begin this quiet, heavy journey into a piece of history you were never meant to carry. You wake, not because of light, but because of a smell. Not the warm scent of bread toasting, nor the beeswax burning under a lamp, but something else. A cold, metallic smell, mixed with the stale damp of moldy canvas and the unfinished smoke of dying embers. Your hand touches the animal hide on the floor, thickened by dried blood and night dew. No bed, only a corner of a tent, patched together with old wood and pressed straw, about a mile from the market. Far enough that the screams don't reach the ears of vegetable buyers, but close enough for them to come watch when you begin work. You never truly sleep. You only close your eyes for a while. The sleep of an executioner is not like other people's. It is not continuous, not peaceful. It comes in broken swells of blurred dreams, cut apart by the wind, by the scratching of rats' claws, and by the fleeting image of someone looking at you without truly looking. You wrap the coarse coat around yourself. It is heavy and damp, as if time itself had soaked into every thread. The inner lining is blotched with reddish-brown stains, from your hands, from the axe blade, or from years no one has bothered to count. You step outside. It isn't bright yet, but it is no longer dark. The sky looks like lime powder stirred thin in river water, pale, cloudy, without shape. A light breeze drifts past, carrying the scent of trampled grass. And of today. Because you know someone will die today. No one needs to tell you. No one comes to knock on your door. You feel it. Like an animal that scents blood before it flows. You know, as on other days, there will be someone waiting for you. A block of wood set in place, a rope ready, a drum's beat, and a gaze lowered, but not entirely out of respect. You pass through a narrow alley. No one greets you. A black cat watches from a rooftop. It does not fear you, but it does not come closer. You walk past the old tavern, the place where people tell stories at night. Once you heard your own name in one of their tales. Not your real name. Only that one, the axe swinger, the man who doesn't blink. You drank a cup and left. No one asked what you did. They knew, but no one wanted to hear it from your mouth. Your shoes are caked with mud. Not from rain, but because the place you go is always wet. The soil around the gallows never dries. It clings to your steps as if it means to pull you under, as though that place is meant not only to bury criminals, but also those who lay hands on death. You arrive before the crowd. Of course, you always arrive first. Not out of duty, but because it is the only part of the day that belongs to you alone. The stake is already raised. You did not raise it. Someone else did. Your work is only the final part, the part no one wants to do, but everyone wants to see. You touch the axe blade, not sharp, not dull. It will cut if your hand does not tremble. Have you ever trembled? Yes, but no one has seen it. You learned to hide it in your breathing. There were days you missed. Not your fault. The condemned moved. The axe went astray, and you had to strike again. The crowd roared, not in grief, but in disappointment. They came to witness a clean death, not a spectacle. You stand still in the mist. Far away, the sound of wheels turning, the cart carrying the prisoner. You do not look into their eyes, not out of fear, but because you have looked into too many eyes already. And not all of them hold hatred. Some, worse, hold forgiveness. The scaffold is set. The drum sounds 3 beats. You step forward like a sleepwalker. Your wrists lock, but no one can see it beneath the gloves. Your mouth stays silent. That is not your role. Someone else reads the sentence. Someone else holds the crowd. You are only the instrument. You look at the rope. This one is new. The last one snapped halfway through. You remember the crack of it and the startled screams of those watching. That day, you were reprimanded. Not for killing, but for breaking procedure. You check it 3 times. Not out of care, but because you refuse to fail again. Not for honor, you have none. But because you don't want to hear another word of scorn from someone who wouldn't dare touch what you touch. The prisoner steps forward. Bare feet, pale, ankles bound, eyes covered. But you know. They know you are there. Everyone knows you are there. You take the rope in your hands, not rushing, not dragging, just enough to feel the tension hum. You wait for the signal. Sometimes it's the drum. Sometimes a nod. You don't need to look, you can feel it. And then, it's over in a single movement. No sound, no applause, no shouting, only a stillness, as though no one dares to exhale. You don't look back, not out of fear, but because it no longer matters. You step down. Someone else clears the scene. You don't help? Not because you think yourself above it, but because that's the rule. The executioner must not touch the body for long. They fear you might bring something back with you. You return. Through the narrow alley, past the eyes peeking from behind curtains. No one speaks. A child once asked what you did for work. Its mother pulled it away at once. Since then, you no longer visit the market in the mornings. You return to your corner of the tent, sit down, hang the axe on the wall, coil the rope neatly. You look at your hands. They no longer tremble, but they no longer feel. Outside, the daylight is full. A pale sun spills in. You close the door, because you have no need for sunlight. You only need to forget until next time. Your name is not in the ceremonial records. Only a quiet footnote. The one who carries out the sentence. Not an official title, not a priest. No right to ordain, no blessing placed upon your hands. But the entire town knows you. Not by name. They know by the eyes. You pass through the market in the afternoon, when the crowd has thinned. The vegetable seller pulls her hand back, not out of hatred, but because she doesn't know how to act. You wear no rags, no more unkempt than anyone else. But you carry the smell of what has happened. A smell that, even after bathing, even after burning fragrant leaves, clings beneath your fingernails, in the seams of your sleeves, in the creases of skin where rope once bit. A child watches you from behind a pile of radishes. Its eyes are wide, dark, not afraid, only curious. You think to nod, an old reflex, but the mother pulls it away. "Don't look," she murmurs. "Don't ask. You are not angry. You have long been used to it." There are glances that never meet you directly. They do not look into your eyes. They look at your hands, your shoes, something near you, as if their gaze could pass without bearing the weight of it, as if looking too long would stain them. as if you carried a curse no one dares to name. And then there are those who look straight at you, without blinking, without turning away. Often they are the ones who had family climb the scaffold. Their gaze is not quite hatred. It is a question. Did you see them cry? Did you stop your hand? Do you remember them? You do not answer. Not because you have nothing to say, but because no one truly wants to hear. Here, you are part of the order. No one wants you, but no one dares demand you gone. You are the one who gives punishment a shape. You turn verdict into act. You do what everyone believes must be done, but no one will do themselves. Once, you went to the church. Not to pray, only because it was raining, and the door was open. You sat at the back, quietly, in the dark. The priest was speaking of forgiveness. When you stood to leave, a few turned their heads. An old woman frowned. A boy whispered to his mother. And the priest paused, just for a heartbeat, before continuing as if you weren't there. You never went again. The townspeople's eyes have their own sound. It is not spoken, but you can hear it. The whispering behind your back. The faint scrape of doors shut quickly. The cough in a tavern when you walk in, as though something is caught in their throats. You once tried to live as others do. You once tried to buy flowers for a woman. Just a small bunch, wild, pale purple. The seller hesitated. "Who are they for?" she asked. You only smiled. She went quiet for a moment, then wrapped them in paper older than usual. You knew she didn't want to touch your hand. The woman took the flowers. She smiled. And the next day she was gone from town. Some said she married far away. Some said she couldn't bear the neighbor's eyes. You didn't ask, because you understood. Some connections are wrong from the moment they begin. There are those who don't hate you. A blacksmith, the one who retempers your axe each month. He doesn't talk much, just nods. Never asks if it's been used much. Never remarks on the wear. He just works, as you do. Two shadows working side by side, not touching, not judging. Sometimes, that is the closest thing to closeness you have felt. And then there are the festival days, execution days. The town gathers thicker than usual, children in new clothes, adults with bread, wine, laughter, as if death were entertainment. You walk from your tent to the gallows along a narrow stone street. The crowd parts on either side. No one stands in your way. No one claps. Only the whisper. There he is. Killing again. Never blinks. You are not the main figure. The condemned is the center. You are only the moving hand between the drumbeat and the prayer. But when all is done, they still remember you. They do not remember the sermon. They do not remember the charge. Only, that day he swung the axe like this. A boy asks his father, "Is it fun to be an executioner?" The father slaps his hand, says nothing. You hear, you do not smile, because you were once that boy. Once asked that question. Once watched the old executioner pass, black coat, hand on the axe. Once thought it was a kind of power. Only when you held the axe yourself did you understand. Power does not make you strong. It makes you silent. You lose the ability to speak honestly, lose the ability to explain. Every act is seen through a filthy lens. You cannot be the good man. You cannot be the bad man. You are only the one who does it. You thought the eyes of strangers would lose their weight. But no, they still cut at you. Quietly, steadily, like water against stone. No one throws stones at you. No one drives you out openly. It's just, they don't stand with you when the rain comes. No one invites you near the fire when night falls. No one asks, "How was your day?" You come to understand. You are not part of this community. You are necessary, but not welcome. Like the public latrine, everyone needs it, but no one wants it near their home. And when someone dares to step closer, someone kind, someone quiet, you do not know whether to thank them or fear them, because you no longer believe in kindness. You once tried to keep a journal, recorded the eyes of the first person you struck, the first who smiled at you before they died, the first who spat in your face. But the paper softened. The ink faded. You stopped writing, because you understood. No one will read it. No one wants to know what an executioner feels. The eyes of the townspeople will never change, because they do not want to see the human in you. They only want to see the function, like the bell at the street's end. No one loves it. They only want it to ring at the right time. You are the one who rings the final bell, not as a warning, but as an ending. And when you have passed from sight, they return to their bread, their wine. But their hearts are still quiet, not because of you, because tomorrow they know they will need you again. They do not call your name. They do not curse. They do not shout. But when you pass, everyone steps aside from the things you carry. An axe, a rope, a wooden stake buried into the ground. None of them can speak, but they have memory. And people know. You are the one who brings that memory back to life when needed. Your axe is not like a woodcutter's. It is larger, longer, the handle old but firm, the steel head thick, not razor sharp, but heavy to cut deep. You do not sharpen it. You don't need to. What you need is weight and steadiness in the hand. No one touches it, not even the blacksmith when you bring it in. He uses tongs to hold it, wraps it in cloth to hand it back. They do not fear it because it can kill. They fear it because it has killed. Every notch in the blade is a silent witness. No one wants to inherit the debt by holding it, even once. You once hid it in a case, kept it behind thick cloth. But even unseen, they knew. A child passing the tavern once blurted out, "I've seen that axe before. It breathes." You didn't argue, because sometimes you think so too. At night, when wind slips through the cracks, you hear a faint metallic rasp, as if someone is sharpening a blade far away. You know, no one works so late, yet the axe still hangs there, and you cannot sleep. The rope is different. It is not heavy, not sharp, just a simple loop, triple twisted, braided from hemp or horsehair. You once thought it was the easiest thing to replace. An old rope rots. You use a new one. A rope breaks. You tie it again. But you were wrong. Not every rope will obey. Some slip. The neck does not tighten. Some twist unevenly. The head falls to one side. Some are too soft. The body sways endlessly, refusing to be still. You do not believe in superstition. But after enough times, you begin to sort them. Some you can use, some you cannot. You cannot explain why. Only that some ropes have a feel. They fit your hands, or they don't. You once kept a piece of rope. The first you used on a young man. He did not beg. He did not tremble. You never knew his name. Only the smell of burning hair when the wind blew back in your face. You coiled the rope and hid it beneath the floorboards, for no purpose, only to remember. But then, one night you dreamed it tightened around your own neck. You could not breathe, not from choking, but from a weight in your chest, as if what you had bound was not just someone's neck, but something inside yourself. The next morning, you took that rope to an empty field, burned it. No one saw, no one asked, no one. Only a crow passed overhead, calling 3 times, then going silent. The stake is cruder. No one thinks of it until it is raised in the square. A thick log, upright, buried deep. No artistry, no carvings, no rites. Just a marker where people come to look, to hear the drum, to shout, to throw tomatoes, stones, eggs, or urine. But to you, the stake is not merely a prop. It is a stage, the final point of every sentence, the place where you must step, stand in the right spot, keep the right distance, watch the wind, so death will come as intended. Once, you slipped on the platform, a nail sticking up where it shouldn't. You stumbled, hand unsteady. Luckily, you hadn't lifted the axe. If you had, the entire execution would have been declared a failure, and you would have been reprimanded. Not for mercy, but for shaming justice. The stake has its own voice. It creaks under your step. It groans when it rains. The wood rots year by year, but no one replaces it. Because no one wants to see it when it's not needed. It is brought out only for the day. When finished, taken apart, hidden in storage, just like you. Once, someone asked you, why not leave the stake there, save the trouble of setting it up again? You smiled. A smile without joy. You know why. Because seeing it makes people remember someone has died there. And more importantly, someone made that death happen. You. No one wants to eat lunch while looking at a place of hanging. No one wants to drink beside a stake once stained with blood. So, they hide it, as they hide their gaze when you pass, as they hide their relief, that someone else carries the dirty part of justice for them. The tools you use have no soul, but you give them a piece of yours each time you wield them. You wipe the axe with its own cloth. Coil the rope barehanded, even when the fibers burn your skin. Press your palm to the stake to feel its strength, though your hands are already calloused. No one taught you to love your tools, but if you do not know them, they will turn against you. The axe slips, the rope breaks, the stake falls. You lose your work, or worse, your life. And though no one wants to touch them, there are those who sometimes come to your tent. A young man, trembling, asks to borrow the rope. An apprentice smith, curious to feel the axe. You refuse, gently but firmly, not from selfishness, but because you know, once touched, it will follow them home, and it will not leave. You do not want anyone else to become like you, because you know this is not a trade. It is the result of wrong choices, or no choice at all. The tools bear no blame. They only do as they are told. But when the one who holds them disappears, the tools turn into a curse. You once tried to burn the axe, cast the rope into the river, smash the stake. It did not work. The axe would not burn. The rope floated, drifted back to shore. The stake broke, but another tree grew in its place. In the end, you accepted it. They are a part of you, and you are the part no one wants to admit exists in them. No one wants to hold the axe, but everyone wants someone to hold it at the right time. No one wants to keep the rope, but everyone exhales when it tightens around the right neck. No one wants to stand near the stake, but everyone wants it ready when called for. You are the one who keeps all the things no one wants, in their place when they are needed. No more, no less. And in their eyes, that is enough. No one teaches you how to stand and wait to kill a man. No manuals, no mentors. Only you, and the rotting wooden platform half a head higher than the crowd below. You've grown used to its height. 3 steps, one edge broken, a nail jutting up from the second plank. In rain, the boards slick as if greased. In sun, they burn your feet into blisters if you stand too long, and you stand waiting for the signal. Not from the mouth of God, but from a man's voice somewhere below. A judge, a mayor, someone with more authority than you. Yet no one in the crowd hates him. They hate you, because he only gives the sign, and you are the one who acts. Sometimes, you feel like his shadow, a shadow with an axe. A shadow nailed to this platform, unable to leave even after the work is done. You are not allowed to sit, not to move too much, not to speak, only to stand, silent, part of the scenery. time does not pass as it does for others. You no longer feel each minute, each second, only the sense of stretching, a hollow space trapped between two moments, before death and after death. No one dares ask what you think in that time. And perhaps you wouldn't want to answer. Truth is, you don't think much. You feel more than you think. You feel the crowd's eyes. You feel the murmurs. You feel the faint tremor in the hands bound behind the one waiting beside you. And you feel the wind, the only thing here that does not hate you. It moves through your hair, through the heavy cloak, through each drawn-out second, as if pulling at the curtain between the living and the soon-to-be dead. You've counted how many times the wind changes. Once, twice. By the third, it is usually when they start to cry. Not loudly, just the sharp breath, the swallowed sob, or the murmur, as if speaking to someone far away. You are not allowed to comfort, not to touch, not to seem human. You are a tool, and a tool cannot be soft, because if you are soft, the axe will waver, the rope will slip, the death will take too long, and the crowd will be angry, not because they pity the condemned, but because they do not want to be reminded that death can be messy. You know this better than anyone. You have been late before, not on purpose, only because they stumbled on the way up, and you hesitated. But the crowd did not care. They shouted. They called you coward. They threw something at the platform, missing, but enough for you to understand. You exist only when you perform your role. A killer, clean, swift, without tremor. The platform is wood. The stake is not tall, just high enough for the crowd to see the head. No roof, no shade, and no room for error. You stand there, in sun or rain, in cold or heat, in wind or fog. Hand on the axe, eyes on nothing, back straight as if nailed to the planks beneath you. Sometimes, you hear flies, a small sound. But when you've been still long enough, you hear the finer world, the shift of the guard's feet, the faint ring of metal in a sheath, the clop of wooden sandals outside the yard. You have wondered, if you weren't the executioner, what would you be? A shoemaker, a saddle stitcher, a woodcutter, or just a name lost in the stream of the unremarkable? No one answers. No dream comes. Only this platform. And the low gray sky, as if waiting for something to fall from you. At times you think, perhaps time really has stopped. Once, you stood waiting an entire watch. The officials late, the prisoner locked in the wrong cell, the people gathered early and grew restless. And you still stood. No order, no drum, only eyes fixed on the platform, as if demanding you do something. But you are not permitted to act without the signal. You are a tool, and a tool does not decide. That hour stretched until your eyes watered, not from feeling, from wind whipping, from smoke drifting from the grill nearby. And you could not rub your eyes, because all of them were watching. You stood like that, until the first drumbeat, and like a charm, time began to move again. 1 beat, 2 beats, 3. You lift the axe, or pull the rope, or step aside to watch another body's final struggle in the seconds that belong entirely to the crowd. And then, silence again. Some applaud, some retch, some cry, some laugh aloud. But you still stand there, silent, as though nothing has happened. Death, to you, is no longer the climax. It is the release from waiting, because it is the waiting itself that eats at you day after day, not the chipped blade, not the frayed rope, not the blood, but the hours of standing alone, in the middle of a crowd, under eyes that will not hold you long, but will not let you go. You have forgotten the faces of those you've executed, but you remember exactly how high the platform stands, when the wind usually changes, and that each time the axe rises, time finally breathes again. When the last drumbeat falls silent, you hear nothing at first. Not because your ears have gone numb, but because the world itself seems to pause, in a stillness longer than any prayer. You have just brought the axe down, or tightened the rope, or kicked the trap door so the noose falls at the exact moment. Each time it ends like this, you don't feel relief. Only as if the cold seeps from your feet all the way to your throat. No one teaches you how to step down after a death. There is no right for the executioner. No one calls your name. No one pats your shoulder in thanks. No one says, "You did well." You just stand there, like a part of the scene that has finished its role. At your feet lies a body. No more struggling, no more breath, no more face. Only an it, a corpse, a case closed. But you have heard their names before, written on paper, shouted by kin in the crowd, whispered between breaths, scrawled in charcoal on the prison wall. You remember once, a young woman was hanged for stealing bread. Her name was Elsbeth. You're not sure you recall it exactly, only that when the rope tightened, she called for someone. Anselm, perhaps the name of her son. That name lingered in your mind for years after. Not because you pitied her. You've forgotten how to pity, but because that name later belonged to your newborn nephew. When the execution is done, you are not allowed to leave at once. You must wait. Wait for the churchman to come read the final blessing. Wait for the guards to clear the body. Wait for the officials to confirm. And wait for the crowd to disperse. Not out of respect, but because the smell has begun to rise. Not the smell of blood, but the smell of smoke, of rope burning, of half-charred wood. And the worst of all, the smell of human flesh gone cold. Once you heard an old woman murmur, "It's like the ash after a sacrifice." You didn't know whether to nod or shake your head, because ash is something everyone sees. But few will admit it was once a person. You are not allowed to speak to the dead person's kin, not to look at them, not to touch them. But once, you saw an old man bend to pick up a wool cap dropped near the platform's edge. He held it as though cradling his child's head. No tears, no words, only standing there, as if holding a handful of ash still clinging to him. When you turn away from the scaffold, the sun is usually tilting. The light softens and fades. Everything seems to sink into a deeper gray, as if the whole town is pulling a mourning cloth over itself. You walk back to your small room at the end of the alley. No one greets you on the way. No one steps aside. The baker shuts the oven early. The market-goers avert their eyes. Children stop playing. And the scaffold remains there, caked in mud, rope still dangling, a blackened patch on the planks, whether ash or mud, or a fragment of what was left, no one says. Night comes, and no one calls you out for a drink. You have no friends, no colleagues, no one who wants to hear what went wrong today. The moans still stay inside your head. Even when outside, there's only the wind through the rotting window frame. Even when you've stuffed rags in your ears. Even when you've drunk 2 cups of vinegar wine to wash away the dead's voice. But you still hear, not with your ears, with your body, with your spine, with your gut, tightening each time you recall the eyes of someone who knew they would die but could not run. You've heard it said, "Kill enough and you'll get used to it." You're not sure you have. You just no longer react. You once tried to count, perhaps more than 30 or 50. You keep no ledger, only the feeling, each one leaving a mark in a different corner of your chest. One cold, one hot, one light as a passing breeze, one heavy as a stone, pressing on your heart when night falls and the hearth has yet to be lit. You once asked a priest, "Am I still a man?" He looked at you for a long while, then said only, "God sees all." But he does not always speak. You don't know if it was comfort or warning, only that you still must sleep alone, in a bed that smells of ash, with hands that have held the axe, and eyes that have watched death without closing. The next morning, you rise early again, wash your face in cold water, wipe your boots, wrap the axe in cloth, and no one asks who you killed yesterday. They don't want to know. They only want you to do it right next time, fast, clean, few mistakes, little blood on their shoes. You've understood. You are only the executioner, not a person. Only the hand that grips the haft, only the shadow on the scaffold, only the cold that lingers when the crowd is gone, and the ash is still there, clinging to the nails, caught on your coat, threaded in your hair, even after you've washed 3 times, even after you've burned the old clothes. What remains is not a smell, but a memory, invisible, untouchable, but always present, between each breath in the silence after the drum has stopped. Their names? You no longer remember them all, but they existed, beneath your blade, before the watching crowd, in a town that does not want blood, yet always keeps a scaffold ready. You are simply the one chosen to carry it out. And each death leaves a little ash, a breath, a cry, and a corner within you that will never be clean. No one grows up dreaming of becoming an executioner. No child, when asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" answers with the 2 words, "To behead." No one embroiders a little shirt for their son with black thread spelling "future hangman." Those who become executioners do not choose it. Or if they do choose, it is only after every other choice has vanished. Some become executioners because they carry a family name already stained. An uncle executed for heresy, a brother once a deserter, a father who died in prison, unclaimed. Blood once tainted cannot be washed clean. Neighbors do not forget. The name is recorded in the ledger, not in the section for the dead, but in the one marked untrustworthy. No one will marry their daughters. No one will take them on as a blacksmith's apprentice, no matter their skill. No one will admit them into church, no matter how long they kneel, knees purple from waiting. And so, they take the work no one wants. They do not need anyone to believe they are good, only that they have bread to eat. Others are the sons of executioners. Wherever there is a gallows, there is someone assigned to it. And that man rarely has a willing heir. Unless his son can do nothing else. No one wants the executioner's boy kneading their bread. No one wants the hands that once held a criminal's life to cradle their newborn. So, when the father dies, the son takes over. Not an inheritance, a curse. The axe left hanging, the rope already coiled, the shadow no one else will stand in. You might learn to tie a noose at 13, not because you want to, but because your father teaches you, for no one else will. Some become executioners because there is nowhere else to go. A man once a soldier, hands trembling after war, unable to hold a spear, unable to hear the drum without flinching, and no one will hire such a man except the court. You've killed before? Yes. Then killing again by order of the law. What's the difference? The logic is simple. The pay is steady enough. And if the conscience does not speak, or has long been silent, the work proceeds by the book. And there are those who are chosen. The authorities choose them because they are strong enough, with few friends, few family, far enough removed from the heart of the town. People like an executioner who leaves no impression, who speaks little, who does not cry, who does not write poetry. And if you do not resist, do not say no, do not run, your silence is taken as consent. Congratulations, you are the new executioner. But being an executioner is not an occupation. It is a forgotten space in society, a small compartment between guilt and law, between being paid and being shunned, between a servant of justice and one polluted by the blood of others. You cannot step into the tavern like a soldier, cannot enter the church like a gentleman, cannot rest in the cemetery like ordinary men. You are an exception, and the mark of that exception sits on your forehead like a brand. There are towns that make the executioner live at the edge of the walls, in a tent with no address. Not for convenience, but so they don't have to see him each morning. In some places, after a hanging, the executioner cannot go home at once. He must wait until the villagers have finished their lunch, so his smell will not spoil their appetite. There are laws forbidding the executioner to touch bread on the common counter. He must use his left hand, must drop coins onto the table without touching the seller's hand. And those coins, they will be washed in salt water, even if they are gold. Many executioners have no grave. No one buries them, no one carves their name. No one wants their descendants to lay flowers there, and so, from beginning to end, their lives have no place to belong. Not to a family, not to the church, not to the public square, not even to the deaths they carry out. Do you think such a person is still a person? Not because they kill, but because society has stripped them from the very definition of human long before. There is an old story of an aging executioner in the north. They say he was once a physician's pupil, once knew how to read, once wrote poetry, once had someone he loved. But when his father was arrested for debt, he had to take the job to feed his mother and 2 younger siblings. He agreed, on one condition: no one would speak his real name again. The townsfolk called him the Black Man, because he always wore a dark cloak, and because no one remembered the face beneath the hood. When he died, no one came. Only a scrap of wood scrawled with, "The man who lived at the edge of town." No name, no date of birth, no words of thanks, only a bit of wind, carrying the scent of an older time, left in a place where no one stops. That is where they come from. Not from hell, not from some dark gate, only from a place no one chooses and no one wishes to look back at. A place that could be anyone if they were born to the wrong family, if they had no one else to stand beside, if they did not refuse quickly enough, or if they were the only one left standing still when everyone else turned away. There is no school that teaches how to kill a man legally, no book with precise diagrams on how to knot a noose so the neck snaps instantly, no illustrated chart showing the exact line between neck and shoulder for a clean cut, no summer course on how to end a life neatly and within regulation. And so, the trade of executioner, though never officially called a trade, is still passed on, quietly, slowly, and only when truly necessary. If you are the son of an executioner, your first lesson begins early, not in words, but in presence. You see your father return before the sky is fully light, with a cloak heavy with the smell of ash, with the rope's mark still faint on his arm, with a single heavy coin, the price of a life. You do not ask, but you know. You are taught how to keep the axe blade, not for any stated reason, only keep the tool ready. You learn how to hold your hand steady, how to look someone in the eye without retreating, how to endure the disgust in the townsfolk's gaze without speaking a word. Some fathers teach their sons in silence, only by standing and watching, once, twice, 3 times, until the boy knows there is only one strike, only one chance to be right or wrong forever. And then, one day, not a fine day, not a special occasion, just the day your father is too tired or his hands have begun to shake, he hands you the axe, says nothing. You understand. It is time. Either you continue, or no one will. But not everyone has a father who is an executioner. and not everyone has someone before them. So there are those who learn alone by failing. They tell of a young executioner. The first time he swung, he used an axe too light. The blow had no force. The condemned did not die instantly. The screams rose. The crowd turned. The judge looked away, and he, hands trembling, eyes shut, swung again. Then a third time. Afterwards, he vomited. Not from the blood, but from failure. From the helplessness of turning what should have been swift into a public torture. From then on, he learned, a heavier axe, the right angle, a firm stance. No one taught him, only the memory of his mistake. Some executioners practice on straw dummies, a turnip fixed at the neck, training to strike at the join between the eyes. Though a dummy does not beg, does not shiver, does not have a soul. Still, it is better than learning on a person. Some learn from their predecessor. An older hangman showing the next how to drop a man so he dies at once. No shouting, no struggling. Measure the height. Tie the knot in the right place. Keep the gap between floor and feet enough to break the neck, but not enough to let them touch the ground. These rules appear in no book. They exist only in whispers, a passing on to reduce pain, not out of mercy, but because screaming makes everything worse. Some learn from the condemned themselves, the weight in the wrist of someone about to die, the sight of anger, of regret, of resignation, or at times of peace in their eyes. The understanding that they are not just a body, they are a story closing. You learn to avoid their eyes, but if you meet them, to hold the gaze until it sees no more. And there is one thing no one can teach, no one can pass down. That is, how to live after you've learned. You can learn to strike without error, to hang a man without rousing the crowd's anger, to clean the axe without leaving a trace. But how to sleep afterwards, how to eat a meal without seeing the red again in your mind, how to hear the church bell without thinking of the execution hour. No one teaches that, only time. And sometimes, even time refuses to help you forget. Some go silent. After 5 executions, no talking, no crying, only quiet, as if their voice had fallen with someone's head, never to be picked up again. Some drink, not to celebrate, but to erase the names of the dead, erase the last look, erase the image of their child asking, "What do you do, Father?" And so, passing on the craft is not only the transfer of skill, it is the contagion of something society will not accept, but will always need. An oil lamp passed from one hand to another, its light dim, its smoke thin, and always carrying the faint scorch of ash. You do not have to be bloodkin to inherit the axe, only to be the one left standing there, only not to run. And when that happens, you are the new bearer of the old task. No one pats your shoulder, no one thanks you. It is simply that the work continues. Their names are still remembered. Those beheaded in the crowded square, the rebel against the king, the wife accused of witchcraft, a poet who spoke the wrong line, a noble fallen from favor. People remember them. Their stories are told again with voices of regret, of pity, or of anger. Sometimes even turned into poems, paintings, plays. They become symbols of injustice, of courage, of sacrifice. And the one who killed them? No one remembers. No one asks the name. No one wants to know what the man in the black cloak with the axe in his hand had to feel when facing a name too large, a gaze too alive, a final word that could break the listener's heart. Yet still he had to strike. You might think some sentences would make the executioner hesitate. But no, it is the famous ones that are the first to kill his compassion. One executioner once said, the first he could never forget, was not because it was too cruel, but because the condemned thanked him. "Please, make it quick. Don't let me suffer. Thank you for not making me wait too long." After that, he stood frozen, not in remorse, but because he did not know what to do with that thank you. No one teaches you how to handle kindness from someone about to die by your hand. Another case, a woman accused of witchcraft. In truth, everyone knew she healed with herbs. People still came in secret to ask for remedies, for advice. But one day, she spoke the wrong words to the wife of an official, and was sentenced. At the time, the executioner was only 30. He remembers her hands clearly, thin but clean, and the scent of her cloth bag, dry mint and earth. She said nothing, only looked at him, and nodded. A nod, as if she forgave him. After that day, he could not sleep for 9 nights, and never lost sleep for anyone again. That is how compassion dies, not by blood, but by things too gentle, too human. There was one execution that enraged the crowd. The condemned was a former knight, once fought for the crown, once saved many lives, but betrayed, falsely accused, and sentenced to the block. As he stepped onto the scaffold, people threw flowers. A woman wept. A voice shouted, "No, he is a good man." The executioner stood still, his heart beat faster. For the first time, he thought, perhaps he was the villain? But then the bell rang. The soldier nodded, and he had to raise the axe. That day, his hand shook. The axe went askew. The crowd roared. The knight still lived. He had to strike again. After that day, he never missed again. Not because he practiced more, but because he never allowed himself to feel again. Emotion is what makes you err. Emotion is what makes the crowd angry. Emotion is what you are not allowed to carry onto the scaffold. Some executioners begin to keep journals, not to record technique, but to remember the ones they do not want to forget. A page, a few rough lines. Today, a priest, his hands full of ink. The woman with a long scar, I don't know from where. A young boy, teeth not yet all grown in. But then, after 30 sentences, they stop writing. No word is enough anymore. Every face begins to look the same. Every scream becomes background noise. The numbness begins there, when you can look into someone's eyes and feel nothing, when the plea is only a sound to pass through, when the name shouted is no different from an object's label. You no longer see a person, only the task, a procedure, a piece of work to be finished before nightfall. You can still remember every technical detail, how deep the cut, the angle of the arm, the distance to stand, how often to wipe the blade. But you no longer remember a single smile, no longer remember a single voice. You have frozen yourself. To survive. No one is born with a cold heart, not even the executioner. He once trembled, once avoided the condemned's eyes, once was haunted by a final whisper. But after enough sentences, the feeling disappears. Not from cruelty, but because there is no other way. So when people tell of famous executions, of the wrongly killed, of the final gaze, of the historic injustice, few ask, how did the man who struck them live after? Some drank themselves to death. Some left the axe, fled, changed their names, hid in the woods. Some kept going until the last execution, then sat down and never stood again. Not because someone killed them, but because nothing was left to keep them alive. And you? How long do you think you could keep your compassion if every week you had to take a life? When the executioner walks home, he carries no blood, no axe, no cry of, "It's done." He only brings back silence. A silence unlike any other. Not peace, not satisfaction, but the heavy stillness of one who has touched death and must keep living. And his wife, she is often the first to feel it. No welcoming embrace. No question of, "How was your day?" Only eyes that avoid him. A small pause when she pours the water. An arm lying still in the night, afraid that touching her husband's skin might mean touching the skin of one who ended a life. People often think an executioner is lonely because society shuns him. But sometimes the isolation begins in his own bed. The wife knows her husband did not choose this work, knows he cried the first time he told her, knows he once wanted to be a blacksmith or a healer, or anything that had nothing to do with rope and a heavy blade. But that doesn't stop the shiver each time she sees his hand on the door or hears his footsteps at night. Once, she was rocking the baby to sleep when she heard him return. The child startled and screamed, not from hunger, not from cold, but from sensing the smell of human skin beneath the black cloak. The executioner lives in the house, but is not truly in the family. He eats last, sits at the table's edge. No one uses his bowl or chopsticks, and more often than not, no one calls to him during conversation. And the children? You think they get used to it? You think they grow strong, accept their father's trade? Number. They learn to bow their heads when walking through town. They learn to pretend not to hear the taunts. Your father kills people. Don't play with him, you'll catch his curse. Some children are never invited to a single festival. No one wants the executioner's name in their family line, even by blood alone. The executioner's son, if he doesn't take up the trade, must go far, far, far away, to where no one knows who he is, to where no one looks at him with measuring eyes. And if he does follow, then his pride must be left behind. Some executioners' wives have tried to defy society, sending their children to school, letting them play with the other kids. But one day, the child comes home beaten. No one defends them, and the teacher says, "I can't do anything. His mother's an executioner." So the mother goes home and burns all the books, not from anger at her child, but because she knows society will never allow that child to learn anything but silence. The executioner loves his wife, but sometimes love cannot save them from the distance. Some nights, he lies listening to her steady breathing and realizes she has turned her back, not from cold, but because she doesn't want to look at him. Some executioners never marry. They live alone, raising chickens, growing vegetables, washing their own clothes, mending their own cloak. No one knocks on their door. No one says good morning. No one asks, "Are you all right?" after a hard execution. And strangely, sometimes that is easier, because they don't have to see fear in the eyes of someone they love every time they enter a room. Others try to marry in a distant village, somewhere no one knows their work. At first, everything is well. The wife smiles, talks, sings, even wears new shoes to town. But then, the whispering starts. Who is her husband? Why does he never work in the day? Why does no one ever visit their home? And the wife goes quiet. No more singing, no more market days. In the end, she leaves, or stays as a shadow, without a voice. Some nights the executioner wakes from a nightmare, not because of a sentence, but because he dreamt his son held an axe. He never says it aloud, only looks at the boy sleeping, soft-faced, hands still uncalloused. And he prays that no one will ever teach him. At times, the executioner lives in a strange state, loving his child enough to die for them, yet fearing the child will become him. So he avoids touching them, avoids holding them, avoids whispering soft things, not from lack of love, but from fear of leaving the scent of death on the child's cheek. The wife, if she is strong enough, will stay, but the marriage is not like others. There are no shared stories over dinner, no unexpected kisses, no teasing in candlelight. only acceptance, silent, unconditional. And both know there will never be a normal day. Sometimes the wife cries in secret when she hears a new sentence has been passed, not because she fears for her husband, but because she knows he will not sleep that night, and the next day the kitchen will be cold. No one will eat, no one will speak, and another small part of the man she once loved will be gone. That is the cost of the executioner's trade, not just the sound of axe on neck, but the distance that seeps into every breath of the home. No one touches you. No one says your name with tenderness. No one truly believes you are human. Once you've held the axe, you live, but as a shadow, in your own house. Not everyone dies with a single stroke. Not every rope can bear the weight and the thrashing. Not every executioner is flawless, though they are never allowed to fail. When an executioner fails, he does not just botch a sentence. He breaks the ritual. He cracks the fragile trust the crowd holds in order. And worst of all, he makes the one who is meant to die become more human. The crowd comes to witness a clean ending, a head falling, the heavy thud of the axe, a rope pulling tight and then falling still. But when the first stroke glances away, when the rope snaps and the body drops like a sack, when the condemned writhes, groans, or, worst of all, screams, something in the spectators shifts, from curiosity to pity, and then to rage, not at the criminal, but at the man with the axe. They roar, "Finish it, clumsy fool! Useless butcher!" The crowd will not accept a technical error. They came for justice, not a tragedy. And now they start to throw stones, rotten fruit, curses. The executioner says nothing, offers no explanation. He is not allowed. He only lowers his head, wipes away blood or tears, and goes on. But his palms tremble, not from fear, but from knowing. The thin trust has just shattered. Some executions turn into disasters. An old hangman, his strength gone, forced to strike a third time, the axe handle slipping from his grasp, blood spraying, the crowd stunned, and then screaming. No applause, no thanks. People go home and tell the story over supper. He missed 3 times, and the man was still calling out. Other times, the rope is rotten, the condemned is dropped, then crack. The body falls to the ground, knees shattered, neck broken, but not dead. And the executioner must climb down, reset the rope, pull the lever again, and the second time, no one looks directly. In that moment, silence is no longer respect. It is dread. An executioner can be dismissed after such a failure, but usually he is not. No one else will take his place. Instead, he is slowly forgotten. No one speaks to him. No one asks him for anything. No one meets his eyes. Even the market cat won't come near. More than anything, he cannot forgive himself. That night he will not sleep. The screams still ringing in his ears, the smell of blood still clinging to his hands. And sometimes he will think, they should have died cleaner than that. Some executioners drink after every failure, not to forget, but to dream of one clean stroke, again. One blow, no miss, no one screaming. Others try to walk away after that day. They throw the axe, burn the cloak. But the law does not let go. You are the executioner. No one else is filthy enough to replace you. Sometimes, after one mistake, the executioner becomes the target. Some villagers say, he must have meant to let that man live. Why wasn't the axe checked first? Maybe he took a bribe. And so, from a tool of justice, he becomes a suspect. No one believes his hand was simply tired, or that the rain was heavy, or the wind pushed the blade. He must be guilty. The crowd doesn't forgive imperfection, especially in blood. Some executioners have fled after a failure, gone into the forest, lived like an animal, afraid to hear human voices, because they cannot bear to hear again the crowds shout, "Worthless! Finish it!" Some have been cursed by the condemned, with their very last breath. "You will never sleep again. I will come back for you. You didn't kill me. You tortured me." And then the executioner finds he sees those faces in every dream. No one writes down the executioner's failures. No history records them. No monument stands. But the dreams remain, and in them his hands always shake. The blade is always heavy, and the head never falls in time. In the executioner's trade, a failure is not a mistake. It is a curse. Before the axe is raised, there is a strange moment of silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of ritual, of something sacred. In most executions of the Middle Ages, especially in great cities like London, Paris, or the towns of the Rhineland, death did not come suddenly. It was staged. And before the blood was spilled, there were always ceremonies. The charges were read aloud, not for the condemned to hear, but for the people. The judge's voice rang out, steady, without tremor. Has stolen, has risen against the king, has defiled the holy law. There was no plea, no last defense, because this ceremony was not for judgment. It was to prove this death is deserved. When the charges were done, a priest would step forward. He wore no armor, carried no sword, only stood as a bridge between the condemned and God. He would ask quietly, "Have you anything to say?" Most would nod. Not to proclaim innocence, but to ask for mercy in the world beyond. Some would cry, some would lift their heads, some would whisper words no one could make out. But there was one thing in common. Even the most stubborn did not wish to die without praying. Sometimes the priest gave them a wooden cross, sometimes a single blessed coin, and in rare moments, the condemned was crowned with a garland of wildflowers, not for beauty, but as a sign, this one has confessed. This one departs in reconciliation. The crowd, largest on sunny days, often fell into silence at such moments. No laughter, no shouting, only the stray sound of weeping, a horse stamping its hoof, a church bell far away, and the fragrance of petals dropped along the execution path by the young women. Yes, throwing flowers. That strange act, scattering small blossoms, often daisies or white roses, was not to honor, but to atone. Not for the one about to die, but for the watchers themselves. They believed, when you witness a death, your soul grows heavier. You must do something gentle to balance it. And so they threw flowers. A small act, but sacred. One petal falling near the executioner's feet, another landing on the prisoner's cloak, another catching on the axe blade, as if to guard it from its own work. This rite, no one commanded it. It was not written in law, no one taught it, but it endured, passed by glances, by stories told, by the quiet need. When forced to face evil, a person must keep something good to hold inside. In some places, the condemned had to drink holy water, not to be absolved, but to prove, I die with the sanction of God. No holy water? Then he might wet his fingers with his tongue and trace the sign of the cross over his chest. No one checked if it was real, because a ritual did not need to be correct, only to exist. Sometimes the execution was held on a saint's feast day, as if to mix death with salvation, morning mass, an afternoon killing, the same bells, the same scent of candles. Some in the crowd carried Bibles, not to read, only to hold, like a charm. Some priests murmured prayers throughout the act, not for the condemned, but for the people, for he knew no one walks away whole after watching a life erased. Once, a mother brought her 6-year-old to an execution. She made the boy kneel and whispered, "Look, this is the law, but you must never do this." No one understood her fully, but no one spoke. When the killing was done, there was often a final prayer, brief, unadorned, only, "Lord, receive this soul. Though guilty, he is still thy child." In some places, the family could take the ashes home. In others, they were scattered into the river, not for cleanliness, but in faith that the water would carry the soul away, washing it of sin. No one was forced to believe these things. No one was forced to do them. Yet nearly everyone did, not for fear of law, but because when faced with a death wrapped in ceremony, people need a smaller ritual to save themselves. One executioner once said, "Each time I strike, I close my eyes for 1 second before the blade touches." Not because I am afraid, but because I want to give the soul time to step away. And then, after all the flowers, the reading of crimes, the prayers, when the crowd has gone, when the priest has left, when the body has been carried off, there remains only the wooden scaffold, a few crushed petals, and one man, the executioner, kneeling, his hands still stained. No one prays for him. No one throws flowers for him. Yet he still whispers, "Forgive me." Though I was not the one who decided. Death in the Middle Ages was not an event. It was a ceremony, and a ceremony always needs someone to believe in it, if only a little. Medieval justice was not blind. It simply knew where to look, and at times it did not look at truth. It looked at status. If you were a noble and you killed a man, you might be sentenced to beheading, swift, clean, and private. If you were a peasant and you stole bread, you might be hanged in the market square until your tongue hung out and the pigeons came to pick at your eyes. On parchment, the law was a list of punishments for each crime. In practice, it was a mirror reflecting the ladder of society. There was an unspoken rule. The low are killed to warn the low. The high are spared or allowed to die gently. Women, especially those accused of witchcraft, were almost never beheaded. Beheading was considered an honorable punishment for men. For them, burning alive, not because the statutes demanded it, but because people had grown used to it. One case in Trier, Germany, in 1588. A woman accused of lying with the devil. No evidence, only rumor. She was burned on wet wood because dry wood cost too much. Meanwhile, a nobleman who killed 2 men in a drunken brawl was jailed for 2 months and fined a horse. Who lived? Who died? It did not depend on guilt. It depended on your place in the order. Some said, "The law is the sword of God." But if that sword only falls on heads without armor, is it still justice? The executioner often knew this best. He was the last link in the chain of power. And he knew. A neck washed clean before the blow was always the neck of someone with rank. At times, he was ordered to execute several for the same crime. But one would be put to death in private. One in the market square. One was given a priest's blessing before death. The other was beaten before being burned. The reason? Never spoken. Everyone understood. The law could also be bought. There was an old saying among merchants, if you have enough silver, the victim's testimony becomes wind. Clergy who sinned were rarely executed, even with proof. They were men of God, judged in the church's own courts, and church courts, punished by sending them elsewhere, not by axe, not by fire, simply gone from where they had sinned. By contrast, a wife who killed her husband after years of abuse was almost certain to burn, not by statute, but by the belief. A woman must not kill a man, even if he beats her until she loses her child. Another case, in Florence, Italy. A boy of 15 stole a loaf of bread. He was hanged before his mother. A soldier said, "This is a lesson for those hungry enough to lose control. In 1349, when the Black Death swept Europe, many Jewish communities were accused of poisoning wells. No proof. Yet thousands were burned alive. No one was tried for killing them, because the law does not protect those of another faith. There was a time when burning was called the cleansing flame. But that flame touched only certain people. In the larger cities, where many could read the law, the injustice was all the more brazen. A noble condemned to death could choose a fine axe, could choose a gentle-handed executioner, could choose his final words. A peasant? No choice at all. Only the rope, whether the day was wet and slippery, or the neck so thin the hanging took long to kill. And there was another class, children. The law named no clear minimum age for execution. It depended on the judge, on his mood. Some were beheaded at 9 years old, for theft. No one intervened. Even the corpses of some were left hanging for days as an example. But only the poor, never a noble's body. Death had ranks. The silence of the townspeople also fed the injustice. Everyone knew. No one spoke. Because when you live in a world where the law is like a broken mirror, you only dare look at the pieces that won't cut your hand. Some executioners have wept, not because they killed, but because they knew. The one they killed should not have died. But orders are orders. The law is the law, though the one who wrote it wasn't the one standing on the scaffold. A record from the 15th century reads, "When the rich offend, the law seeks to be merciful. When the poor err, the law seeks to punish." So when you look back at the executions of that age, ask yourself, who lived because they were spared? Who died because they were made an example? Who burned because no one spoke for them? Medieval law did not need to be just. It only needed to look reasonable, and sometimes death was the only reward left that was equal. After the axe has fallen, the silence is not an ending. It is only a space for someone to step into and clean. A body, sometimes two, a head lying crooked on the wooden boards, the body still twitching, and the blood no longer flowing yet spreading like the shadow the person has left behind. The crowd has withdrawn. The mob has gone. But the smell remains. Earth, wet wood, and that briny iron tang clinging to the air like a mourning cloth no one has tied. Who will collect it? There is no official role, no title of body collector, only those who live close by, or those too poor to refuse the work. Sometimes it is a beggar, paid with a few rusted coins, or a piece of the dead person's clothing, a shoe, a strip of belt. Sometimes a few coins sewn into a collar. Sometimes the executioner does it himself. Not from pity, only because no one else will. Or because the longer the body lies there, the more it sickens people against him. At times, a captured thief might be spared the loss of a hand if he agrees to do this work for a year. Collecting bodies, burying them, not allowed to speak to anyone, not allowed to meet anyone's eyes, and not allowed inside a church. Some bodies, especially the poor, are buried in mass pits outside the town. No markers, no stones, only a bare patch of earth that people know to avoid. If noble or permitted by the church, the family may claim the body, but only after it has been cleaned, the corpse wrapped in coarse linen, the head placed in a separate sack. No one may open it. No one may weep too loudly. Some carry the body home at night, quietly, across the fields. No lantern, no sound, because to cry too loud might be taken as defying the court. Sometimes children slip away from their parents and sneak to look. They see an arm not yet covered, a bare foot without a shoe, the flies, the stray dogs hovering. Then they run home, say nothing. But that night, none of them sleep. A priest may be called to speak a prayer, but not for the dead, for the ground, so the earth will not hold a grudge. In parts of rural France, before burial, the collector would dip a scrap of cloth into the dead's blood and hang it on a mulberry tree. They believed, if the cloth dried without flies gathering, the dead was innocent. The crowd has long since gone. And the next morning, the market resumes. In the same place where yesterday a man died, the same spot, the same wooden platform. They buy fish, they haggle over onions, they avoid each other's gaze. And no one asks about the dark stain spreading beneath the butcher's table. Those who shop there later will tell their children, "That day, a man died here, but it wasn't our fault. We just passed by." Once, a villager found a finger still wearing its ring, buried under straw. He sold the ring and died of fever 3 days later. No one picked up rings again. A wife once stood still at the market's edge, watching her husband's body dragged from the scaffold. She did not cry. She only gripped her hem until her hands bled. She buried him on a mound behind the house. At night, she slept beside the grave, using his coat as a pillow. Then she too vanished. No one remembered her name, only called her the mad woman of that year's beheading. In many villages, after each execution, someone was sent to lime the ground, to wash away the blood. But it was never fully gone. There was always one patch darker, even after scrubbing with ash. They called it the rust of justice. Some bodies lay overnight, not from intent, but because of rain, or because the order had not yet come, or because the collector was afraid. Not everyone sees it, but everyone knows. A body after death does not vanish at once. It remains, in the eyes of those who saw, in the dreams of the children, in the whispered stories of the old women. Some say, a few nights after an execution, a figure can be seen walking near the scaffold. Not a ghost, just a wife, a child, a friend, someone not yet used to the absence. A record from the 14th century reads, "A man dies and is silent, but his body speaks through its smell, through its stain, through the silence of those still living." And the executioner? He never goes back to the killing place, never shops in the market, never steps onto the platform once the sentence is done. He knows well, a body does not end when the blood stops. It lives on, in the air, in the dreams, in the hands that once held the axe. No one wants to touch a corpse, not from disgust, from fear. Fear of carrying something home, not a sickness, but a feeling. The feeling that tomorrow, the one lying there could be you. Not many names remain, not many stories are told. The women once executed are rarely written into history, only in whispers and wind. They were called many things. Witch, venom-tongued woman, a harlot in disguise, the one who ruined the harvest, the temptress of married men, but rarely were they called human. Female criminals, in the eyes of the medieval world, were not merely those who did wrong. They were symbols of disorder, of loss of control, of a world turned upside down, where women dared to speak, to stand upright, to resist. And so, they were punished. Some were burned. Before the fire was lit, their mouths were bound with rags soaked in vinegar, not to ease pain, but to keep them from cursing. For all feared that their last words might be true. One woman was executed in 1478 simply because her husband died after supper. No evidence, no examination, only the neighbors' murmur. She didn't cry, and that night she sat still as stone. A girl was condemned for looking too long into a man's face. Her wrists and ankles were chained. She was drowned in the village pond. Underwater, her hands jerked violently, but they said, "She's calling the devil." When her body was pulled up, her mother fainted. No one helped her. Some women were hanged, but face down, for they believed if they looked toward the sky, they might see God. And they were unworthy. Their crimes were sometimes nothing more than being pregnant without a husband, or knowing how to read, or owning a needle and stitching strange beasts into cloth. A girl was burned simply for having a handwritten notebook hidden in her pillow. The words were unreadable to them, so they said, "It must be spells." An old woman in the village had her hand cut off for killing a chicken without bleeding it. She had only wrung its neck, because the house had no knife. But a neighbor's child saw, told his father. And so, a crime. Silence surrounded them. No one spoke for them. No one cried too loud. No one retold their story, without changing names, changing words, for all feared to speak of them was to invite the curse back. In some villages, women who were executed were forbidden burial in the cemetery, their bodies shoved into bottomless pits, covered in straw, then burned a second time. Ashes mixed with old ashes. No one could tell them apart, and no one wished to try. Children were not to be told of them. But mothers would sometimes whisper at the ear, "Sleep now, or the green-eyed witch will take you." Even if that woman had only black hair and a sad song she hummed in the market. In the surviving handwritten sentences, the words for female offenders were often sower of disorder, defiler, raiser of the uncanny, provoker of the male sex, disguiser of forbidden things. No one wrote, hungry. No one wrote, beaten. No one wrote, without choice. Some verdicts repeated a phrase like a litany, to serve as an example to other women, as if they were not people, but mirrors to reflect what was wrong. There was a group of women burned together for being accused of communing under the moon, only because they went to the well to fetch water on a bright night, spoke no words, only looked at one another, but the man passing by saw them and was afraid. A girl was beheaded for refusing to marry the wealthy man her parents chose. She fled, was caught, and was charged with disrupting the order of marriage, defying morality. As arrogant as a she-devil. Some say sometimes women died because they did wrong, but sometimes they died simply for being themselves. The executioner rarely looked them in the eye. For most of them, did not cry, did not beg, did not call their mothers. Only silence, until the end. As if they were long used to not being believed, not being heard, not being spared. After death, they became legend. Some say, on moonlit nights their shapes appear in the village, say nothing, only stand watching, as if waiting for someone to finally remember their true name. Some still believe if one dreams of a woman burned at the stake and wakes without remembering their own name, perhaps they have been followed. But the real curse, perhaps, is not in them. It is in the society that bred such fear. Fear of strong women, fear of clever women, fear of women who needed no permission to exist. Today, in museums, scraps of verdicts remain, ink faded, paper gone yellow. But the woman's name is the faintest of all. We no longer hear their voices, no longer know who they were, no longer remember what made them so feared. Only that there was a time when a woman did not need to commit a crime to be called a criminal. There were moments in history when blood was not demanded by kings, but by the church, not for war, not to kill an enemy, but to save the soul of the very person being killed. It sounds like a paradox, but in the shadows of the Middle Ages, it was its own kind of divine logic. Those called heretics were not sword-bearing rebels. They did not burn churches. They did not curse God. Many were simply a little different in their belief, prayed differently, fasted on another day, or stayed silent when everyone else prayed. That alone was enough to be seen as a threat, not only to society, but to the eternal salvation of everyone around them. When the church began to try heresy, the trial was not held in daylight. It took place in the cellar, by candlelight and incense. The accused was not allowed to choose a lawyer, only to choose whether to confess. And if not, they were deemed hard of heart, which meant worthy of being burned alive. Some were condemned simply for not knowing the Lord's Prayer by heart. An old man burned because he owned a Latin book he could not read. A young woman accused of witchcraft because the midwife said she did not cry out in childbirth. People did not fear heretics because they were evil. They feared them because they made others doubt. And doubt was dangerous. It spread like sickness. So when someone was convicted, the fire was prepared early, not to punish, but to purify. Fire, in the eyes of the church, was the symbol of the Holy Spirit. Thus, burning alive was a sacred punishment. The crowd was invited to watch, not to shout, but to pray. The chant of prayers rose with the flames. The screams drowned beneath the tolling of the church bell. Some knelt, some wept, not for the one being burned, but from fear that if they did not, they might be next. Some victims had a small pouch of herbs tied around the neck to keep the smell of burning skin from disturbing their final confession. A strange kind of mercy. Some burnings lasted nearly an hour, not because the fire was weak, but because the condemned had been soaked with water first, so they might live longer. A merciful ritual to give them more time to repent. In certain records, the condemned could request to be turned toward the east, toward Jerusalem, toward hope. No one knows if such requests were granted, for most verdicts ended with the phrase, handed over to the secular arm, which meant the church took no responsibility for the execution, only for beginning it. But sometimes, the crowd did not come for faith. They came for curiosity. They brought bread, wine, lifted children onto their shoulders for a better view. A burning became a public event, like a festival, but quieter, heavier with smell, and leaving more shadows in the mind. After the fire died, the body was often broken apart with shovels, not from cruelty, but because the bones of a heretic were not to remain whole. They must be shattered, scattered. Nothing left, for someone to take as a reverse relic. Some still secretly kept a burnt nail, a lock of charred hair, or the iron base of the stake as a charm. Others threw away anything the condemned had touched, for fear of catching the dark soul. Inside the church, there might be a whispered prayer. Lord, let not their blood stain my hands. And an answer, vague in the mind. You only lit the fire. You were not the judge. But truly, was there a difference? Heresy never called itself by that name. They called themselves believers, seekers, those who looked deeper, those who prayed quietly in their own tongue instead of Latin, and for that, they died. Witches, too. Many of them were folk healers, midwives, makers of teas from forest leaves, whisperers of small charms to calm crying infants. They did not call lightning. They did not command spirits. They simply knew things. Others did not, and that was enough to be feared. From the 13th to the 17th century, thousands were burned in the name of deliverance. Deliverance of the soul. Deliverance of the community from the wrong presence. Deliverance from the unease in the faith of those who lived nearby. Some priests wept afterward. Others kept journals, recording every plea, every movement of the flames, as though These were testimonies of devotion. Today, we read the verdicts and wonder, how could anyone believe that burning another alive was an act of love? But in the darkness of blind faith, the line between salvation and killing may be thinner than we think. The Church's name remains. The name of the one burned does not. They are heretic number, Altunja, the witch of region R, the red-haired woman. No one asks, who were they? Who once loved them? Who once heard them sing, thinking they were alone? And then the ashes blow away, lost in the wind, leaving no form, only the haunting of a time when light was drawn from fire. Not every death was an accident. Some deaths were prepared days in advance. They had a schedule, a stage, an audience, and someone assigned to perform convincingly so that others would know exactly what happens when you disobey. In the Middle Ages, the executioner was not a monster. They were a tool of the king, of the church, of the law, and of fear, carefully organized. You see, law in those days was not written on paper. It was written in human bodies, in bloodstains on the square, in the swing of a club into the air, followed by silence after the blade fell. There was no television, no newspapers. The only way for the law's message to travel was for the people to witness, with their own eyes. This is the consequence. This is the price. This is what happens when you break the order. No long speeches were needed. No royal decrees read aloud. Just a rope, a gallows, and a silent crowd. It was enough. So the executioner was not simply a killer. They were the one who made symbols tangible. A single hanging in the marketplace could keep an entire town obedient for a year. A single beheading of a smuggler could bankrupt a dozen others, but keep them alive. Not everyone believed in the law, but everyone believed in fear. And the executioner was the living shape of that fear. The king could not cut down every rebel himself. The priest could not burn every witch. The judge could not leave the bench to hang a thief. But someone had to do it. Someone whose hands did not shake, whose eyes did not wander, whose mind did not ask questions. A person who could silence children just by having their name spoken, could stop all talk in the tavern simply by stepping inside, could step onto the scaffold and say nothing, and still be understood. The law had taken form. And so the executioner existed not because of the law itself, but because of the need to enforce it in a way no one could forget. For fear to work, death had to be seen. No one fears what happens in the dark. They fear what they are forced to watch, without looking away. That is why public execution was as essential as taxes, as the church, as the town clock, a daily reminder. Some places built stands around the gallows. Some placed the beheading block in the heart of the marketplace. Children were lifted onto shoulders to see better. Couples came as if to a fair. The elderly sighed. When I was young, I saw one just like this. Each death was a way for society to remember who ruled it. You did not need to kill many to keep order. You only needed to kill where everyone could see. The ruling class knew this better than anyone. When dissent began to spread, they did not add more soldiers. They increased the frequency of executions. Hangings at dawn when people walked to work. Beheadings at midday when the market was full. Not for convenience, but for visual impact. You could evade taxes, you could skirt the law, but you could not avoid a body hanging in the street. It was not the executioner who created power. It was power that needed the executioner, like a piece on the chessboard. Each death was a move, a reminder, a drumbeat in the silence, not to awaken, but to steady. Some sentences were not for justice at all. They were for someone to die so the rest would be quiet. And in those moments, the executioner did the dirty work so that those in power could keep their hands clean. When an executioner killed a rebel noble, the crowd cheered. Not because they hated him, but to see that the law was strong enough to touch the highborn. When an executioner killed a poor man for stealing bread, the crowd stayed silent. Because they understood, the law was willing to punish the lowborn too. The executioner did not choose between classes. They simply carried out orders, and that trained indifference made them the perfect emblem of authority. No one spoke to the executioner, but everyone quietly relied on them. Because as long as the executioner was there, people remembered to be afraid. And when people were afraid, society was orderly. The irony was this: the executioner was often the one who saw injustice most clearly. They knew who deserved death, who was innocent, who was a sacrifice for stability. But they were not allowed to ask, only to cut. Thus, death became a tool of education, not to teach letters, but to teach limits, to teach who was master, to teach what could not be done, not through books, not through classrooms, but through blood on old wood. So do not be mistaken. The executioner did not exist to punish. They existed to prevent. Not a killer, but a reminder. The one who swung the axe, not out of hatred, but so that others would not become the next target. And perhaps to those in power, that was the most important thing. Not law, not justice, but order, even if the price was a severed head, a silent crowd, and a man with an axe, walking home in the dark, unspoken to. There is a certain irony that the one who kills for a living is also the one the law protects more than anyone else. In the Middle Ages, being an executioner was not a job. It was a function recognized by the state, a position no one wanted, yet everyone needed to exist. And to ensure that this person kept holding the axe, the law sheltered them. Executioners were often granted land, exempt from certain taxes, given a house near the courthouse. In some places, they were even paid extra so they wouldn't abandon the post, because finding a new executioner was not easy. Records from parts of Germany say executioners had the right to refuse trial in regular courts. They could demand a higher jurisdiction because they were considered an official instrument of the king. Some cities even assigned guards to protect the executioner if anyone threatened them, not out of kindness, but out of fear of losing the one who maintained order. In short, the law never abandoned the executioner. It even favored them. But what about society? What about the townsfolk? The church? You could be an executioner with the king's order, with the seal of the court. But walk into a tavern, and no one will sit with you. Go to the market, and no one will sell you vegetables at the normal price. Attend church, and the priest's eyes grow distant. And your confession? No one wants to hear it. The executioner belonged to the law, but not to anyone. In parts of France, they were only allowed to live in a separate quarter, cut off from the townsfolk. Some places would not let an executioner touch bread, not because it was dirty, but because those hands have held blood, held the axe, held the souls of the dead. Certain rules forbade an executioner from stepping into another person's home, not out of fear of theft, but because they believed misfortune would follow them inside. And when the executioner went to the market, they had to ring a bell, a small bell at the belt, not to sell goods, but so others would know to step away. The law gave them the right to live. Society denied them a place to belong. Their children could not attend the same schools. Their wives had to work on their own, because no one would hire someone who had touched the killer's hands. Their families lived, but lived in silence. Some records tell of executioners returning home after a beheading to find their doorway sprinkled with salt, or a dry garlic branch hung there, or a cross in charcoal on the wall, a sign to ward off spirits. The executioner was not only shunned, they were openly cursed. So why did they stay? Because choice sometimes no longer existed. Many were children of executioners, born into houses that smelled of metal, raised under averted eyes, hired nowhere, taught no trade. Only one skill: to kill a person, without needing a second stroke. They were protected by law not out of compassion, but out of necessity. The law could not exist without someone to carry out its punishments. You could have the finest laws written, but if no one swings the blade, the law is useless. The executioner lived like a nail between two planks, driven in by the king's hand, but embedded in the people's heart. No one saw them as kin. No one dared call them friend. And when they died, they were not buried with ordinary folk. Some places required the executioner's grave must lie at the edge of the cemetery, far from the church. No bells, no rites, no wine, much like how they had lived, alone, quietly, with no one daring to come close. And yet, at times, society needed them. When there was unrest, who was summoned first? When there was rebellion, who was made the example? When the law was ignored, people remembered the executioner. They were like a surgeon's knife. No one wanted to touch it. But when the body rotted, it was the thing placed in the doctor's hand. You see, the executioner was both protected and despised. A strange circle. No one wanted them to exist, but no one dared let them disappear. And then, after decades of holding the axe, when the hands shook, the eyes dimmed, and the blade began to miss, they became a burden. No one hired them. No one visited. No one told their story. Just a faded name in the ledger of crimes that no one even knew how to pronounce anymore. The law of that time was a double-edged blade. One side struck crime, the other cut into the hand that carried it out. And the executioner bore that wound every day. No complaint, no accusation, just walking home at night, placing the axe in the dark, hoping tomorrow they would not be needed, but always knowing they very well might be. You think an execution is something gruesome? Something that should only happen in the dark, where no one can see? Perhaps you'd be right if you lived in the modern age. But in medieval Europe, a beheading could be the biggest gathering of the month. From early morning, people poured into the square, not because they needed to buy anything, but because today there would be a head on the block. Fritters fried right there on the spot. Small stalls sold cider. Children laughed, chasing one another around the execution post before it was even set in place. Further off, seats were built for noble ladies. Some barons brought spyglasses. A few families brought their lunch. You can imagine it. The smell of fat, the tang of cider, the smoke of burning wood, all mingling with the damp chill of morning air. Everyone knew there would be blood. No one seemed unsettled, because blood was not a tragedy. Blood was part of the program. For many in that age, a public execution felt like a performance. The condemned was the lead actor, the executioner, the one who closed the scene, and the crowd, the silent audience waiting for the finale. Not always silent. In some places, nobles came not to witness justice served, but to be entertained. They laughed when the condemned stumbled, applauded if the executioner made a clean strike, and murmured disapproval if the blade slipped, ruining the scene. Some cities even had laws allowing tickets to be sold for an execution. The money paid for guards, the scaffolding, and hired drummers, because there had to be drums to drown out the screaming. Sometimes an execution was set for the exact day of a festival, not to interrupt it, but to add to the attraction. An execution in the middle of celebration. A reminder. You may enjoy yourself today, as long as you don't break the law. And in that crowd, there were sometimes children, perched on their father's shoulders, peering out from behind their mother's cloak, pointing at the block as though it were a curious object. Some cried, some laughed. Some would one day become executioners themselves. Why such scenes? Were people then more cruel? Not exactly. Perhaps they simply lived in a time when death was not hidden away. You see, medieval people had no cinema, no Netflix, no TikTok, but they still needed something to tell stories about, something to remember, to connect with neighbors, to gossip over for weeks. And an execution provided all of it. One public execution could leave the market silent for an entire day, then buzzing for the next 3 weeks. Who cried? Who screamed? Who laughed when blood splashed their shoes? One account tells of a noblewoman who fainted when blood stained her velvet dress. In other places, guards had to push the crowd back because they pressed too close, wanting to see the condemned's face clearly. Some cities placed the block at the very center of the square, not just for convenience, but to ensure everyone had to look. Because when everyone witnesses, no one dares repeat the crime. You might call it cruelty, or a refined form of control. When death becomes spectacle, power becomes theater. And the executioner? Standing there, on the weathered planks, hearing the murmurs, feeling the gaze of hundreds, none of them a friend. None would clap his shoulder afterward. Just once, they would clap. They clapped if he killed quickly, if the blood sprayed high, if the head fell exactly on the drum's beat. A cold kind of applause, hollow, but never absent, because no one wanted to see the executioner's hands shake. No one wanted to see the rope slip. No one wanted blood flung in their face. They wanted the blood to fall like a dance, with music, with rhythm, with a proper end. That is why public executions endured for centuries, not because they were necessary, but because they were accepted, and then anticipated. Do you think, in that crowd, anyone truly prayed for the condemned? Perhaps some did, quietly, inwardly, without a sound, because the applause had already drowned out everything. In some places, once the execution was done, the executioner turned away quickly. Not from fear, but because, if he lingered, he'd hear, "Well done. Good work. Do another one." It wasn't praise. It was a nail driven in, turning him into a circus act, into a diversion, a tool to be applauded when he performed well, and forgotten the moment the stands came down. The children had clapped, the nobles had laughed, and the executioner still stood there, palms damp, the axe heavier on his shoulder, and a feeling with no name, not joy, not quite sorrow, just a strange emptiness, as if he'd just played a role no one had taught him, in a play no one had written. By afternoon, the square was cleared. The blood washed away, the stands dismantled, the fritter stalls packed up. The children went home. The adults told the tale. The nobles noted in their diaries, "Execution, rather impressive." And the executioner slipped quietly through the market. No one called out. No one greeted him. No one asked how he felt. And tomorrow, if there was another execution, the people would come again, bringing their children, bringing their cider, bringing applause already rehearsed from today. Have you ever wondered how an executioner retires? No farewell from colleagues, no ceremony of thanks, no armchair waiting by the fire. Only emptiness, and the sound of footsteps fading away from the scaffold. Most people in the Middle Ages never lived long enough to think about retirement. They died of sickness, of war, of failed harvests. But an executioner, if he survived through enough lives taken, still had to ask himself, "Where do I go when there's no one left for me to kill?" There was no school for executioners, No home for the aged who once held the axe. Only a few rutted roads leading to the outskirts, places people spoke of in passing. Out there lives an old man who used to swing the blade. No one wanted to live beside an executioner, even after he had hung up the axe, stowed away the rope, burned the black cloak. People still remembered, still feared, still avoided. Why? Because some memories need no words. One glimpse of his face, and they remembered blood. So many executioners in old age lived alone, in a wooden shack, at the edge of the village, or deep in the forest, where no one wandered by accident. They grew their own vegetables, split their own wood, spoke only to the stray cats. Some wrote memoirs, not to publish, but to forget. Some cooked well, but were never invited to a feast. Some had saved a child's life, yet no one let their child near him a second time. A few tried to change. They made shoes, sharpened knives at the market, kept the keys to a small shrine, work that asked little and asked no greetings. But there was still a barrier, not of stone, but of eyes. When you have once been the man who took someone's final breath, even by law, even for pay, even without choice, you are no longer ordinary. And in a society that prized the ordinary, such difference was never forgiven. Some old executioners could not bear the solitude. They married late. Their wives were widows, or blind, or women who had once worked in a madhouse, where no one asked what a husband used to do. Executioners' children often took their mother's name, went to school in another village, lied about their father's trade, and later never mentioned him in the family record. You see, when the axe no longer weighs in the hand, it still weighs in the minds of others. Someone might ask, at least they had money, right? They did. Executioners were paid well enough, but money could not buy a greeting, could not buy forgiveness. Some lived on their wives' earnings, or their children's, or on coins buried in the earth. No one hired an old executioner to watch children. No one invited him to teach morals. On some nights, wind slipped through the thatch. He listened. The old drums, the cry of charges read aloud, a voice calling his name, not to thank him, but to accuse. Some in old age turned to the church, sat in the last pew, made no confession, only bowed their head. They knew some sins cannot be absolved, even if they were not chosen, even if they were only the instrument. But an instrument still has a soul, and sometimes that soul weighs more than the blade. And then one day, the executioner dies. No grand funeral, no church bell, only a short word. He's gone. Who will bury him? Usually the town physician, or a few poor men, paid a few coins, or his son, if he had the courage to return. His grave lay at the far edge of the cemetery. No marker, no flowers, just a low mound of earth, where grass grew faster than prayers. In some places, the priest refused the rites, because he had taken human life, even under court order, even in justice, even in service to public order. Some executioners asked to be buried alone, far from the living, and far even from the dead, because they knew their soul was welcome nowhere. Sometimes villagers spoke of a grave in the woods, no name, no cross, yet anyone passing by felt a chill. They whispered, "It's the grave of the man who held the axe." And perhaps that is all that remains, not the name, not the record, but the shadow of a trade no one chose, but everyone needed. You think being an executioner is a burden? Then imagine dying with that burden never set down. No one remembers he worked by the law. No one remembers his hands once trembled. No one remembers he went home quietly after each killing, without food, without sleep. They remember only, he killed people, and that was enough to erase an entire life. Perhaps. If you had once stood on the scaffold, once heard the crying, once seen the head fall by your own hand, then by life's end, the only thing you would want is to forget. But memory does not sleep. We do not know if any executioner was ever buried beside the wife he loved. We do not know if anyone ever placed flowers on his grave. But perhaps, one day, when wind crosses a cemetery, and you see a low mound ringed with a few scattered stones, no name, no flowers, no blessing for rest, stop for a moment and remember, someone once lived, once had trembling hands, once was avoided by all, and then died as if he had never existed. Not because he was a monster, but because he once did the work no one else would do. When an executioner retires, there is no homecoming, only a road leading away from the place of death. And somewhere, in silence, a whole life is buried. You survived. One day, in the life of a medieval executioner, you woke in darkness, smelling cold metal and old blood. You walked past the eyes of those who would never forgive, touched the rope that had not yet dried, heard the drum slow just before the axe came down. And you are still here, still breathing, still listening. But do you want to go on living that life? Not for another day, but for a year, a lifetime, years of killing, years of being shunned, years with no one touching you, not even yourself in the mirror. You once thought, I'll get used to it. Then you heard the final scream, saw eyes wide open that would not close, and you understood. No one ever truly gets used to it. You stepped down from the scaffold, your hands heavy, your back bent, not from age, but because in every joint there is a name you can no longer recall. Yet they once had mothers, once had saints' names, once loved someone, and never knew that their life would end beneath your blade. You said, I didn't choose this. True. Perhaps your father was an executioner. Perhaps you were paid. Perhaps you worked by the law. But at night, the knocking in your head needs no reason. You have survived. But you are still alone. No one sits across your table. No one lights the lamp with you. Sometimes you pretend to hear laughter, just to make the room feel less empty. You have dreamed that someone might look at you as a person. Not a tool, not a curse, just a human who tires, who aches, whose hands can tremble. You thought yourself strong because you did not cry, because you did not run, because you did your duty. But then you saw a child in the crowd, eyes wide, looking at the axe as if at death itself, and you wondered, will they dream of me tonight? You thought only the condemned were victims. Then you realized, some wounds are invisible, they do not bleed, but they never heal. You survived. But you are no longer the person you were, no longer untouched, no longer called by name in the market, no longer able to touch anyone without feeling them draw back. You thought about running away, to a far-off village, to work the land, to live without a name. But then, you knew. Everywhere someone will be killed. Everywhere someone must do it. And you are more used to holding an axe than a plow. You thought you had the right to judge. Then you read the prayer, and the words, "Thou shalt not kill," rang like a sentence no one could overturn. You have survived. But at what cost? Eyes that no longer truly see anyone. Laughter that dies the moment you enter a room. An empty chair at the table. A prayer in which no one speaks your name. You tell yourself, I only followed orders. But orders do not help you sleep. Do not help you forget. Do not help you forgive yourself. One day you fall ill. No one tends to you. No one brings medicine. No one asks. The only one who comes is the tax collector. You have survived. But what is the point, if survival means being forgotten? They will not carve your name on stone. They will not recall how your hands shook the first time. They will not remember that you bowed your head after every sentence. They will only say, "He killed people." That will be enough. You once heard a holy man say, "A soul can be saved." But who will save yours if no one believes you have one? You have survived. But you live in a world that will never let you be ordinary, never let you forget, never let anyone draw near. You sit alone, listening to the rain on the roof, remembering the drums, the names called out, the final gaze, the gaze you carry always. You have survived. But do you want to live that life? No one can answer that but you, and no one ever asked you while you were alive. Now you are at rest. No axe, no rope, no cries, only the night's cold, and a silence no one can touch. And if someone in a dream were to ask you, "Does it hurt to be an executioner?" you would smile and say nothing, because some questions do not need answers. They only need to be heard. Sleep well. You made it to the end, not of a storybook, not of a grand epic, but of a long, slow walk through the life of someone history tried to forget. You survived the day. But after everything you've heard, would you ever want to live that day again? This has been a quiet journey, the kind of history to fall asleep to. No fireworks, no plot twists, just echoes of footsteps, creaking wood, and the soft scrape of iron against stone. And if you're still awake, thank you for walking all the way here with me. If you've already drifted off, then maybe this video did its job. This is History for Sleeping, the home of sleepy historian stories.